Hello, fellow classmates. Welcome to my presentation. The topic for this presentation is Paulo Freire, one of the most important critical educators of the 20th century. Freire was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 1927. He received a law degree from the University of Recife and went on to obtain a doctoral degree and become chair of the Department of Philosophy and of Education. During the military coup of 1965, he was jailed and then exiled for having radical ideas. His most famous work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was published in 1972 and is one of the most influential books in education in the last half of the 20th century. Freire returned to Brazil in 1980 and joined the Brazilian Workers' Party. He served as Secretary of Education in Sao Paulo from 1989 to 1991. He spent his final years writing, lecturing, and building on his earlier ideas. He died on May 2, 1997. Freire was from a middle-class background, but experienced poverty as a child during the Depression. It was a real and concrete hunger that had no specific date of departure. Even though it never reached the rigor of the hunger experienced by some people I know, our hunger was of the type that arrives unannounced and unauthorized, making itself at home without an end in sight, a hunger that would take over our bodies, molding them into angular shapes. Legs, arms, and fingers become skinny, eye sockets become deeper, making the eyes almost disappear. Many of our classmates experienced this hunger, and today it continues to afflict millions of Brazilians who die of its violence every year. Freire spent several decades working with impoverished workers in the social service of industry. His experiences teaching peasants to read and write sensitized him to oppression and informed his theory of education. The peasant is dependent. He can't say what he wants. Before he discovers his dependence, he suffers. He lets off steam at home where he shouts at his children, beats them, and despairs. He complains about his wife and thinks everything is dreadful. He doesn't let off steam with the boss because he thinks the boss is a superior being. Lots of times the peasant gives vent to his sorrows by drinking. What is theory? Pedagogy is the theory and practice of teaching. All teaching is based on theory, whether it's recognized or not. Theory relates to how we understand reality, how knowledge is created, and the knowledge that's valued. Each of these positions inform how we teach. For Freire, there is a reality, but we are limited in our understanding of it by our subjective experience. We increase our knowledge of the world through entering it more fully and seeing it more clearly. The most valuable knowledge is that which can be used to transform the world through action. The subjective aspect exists only in relation to the objective aspect, the concrete reality, which is the object of analysis. Subjectivity and objectivity thus join in a dialectical unity, producing knowledge in solidarity with action, and vice versa. Critical pedagogy is an educational movement guided by passion and principle to help students develop a consciousness of freedom, recognize authoritarian tendencies, and connect knowledge to power and the ability to take constructive action. What is the purpose of education? One of the most significant contributions of Freire was his critique of the banking concept of education, where knowledge of from the teacher is deposited into the students. Teachers' knowledge has authority, value, and power, and students are disciplined and oppressed rather than liberated. In the banking concept of education, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those who they consider to know nothing, projecting an absolute ignorance onto others, a characteristic of the ideology of oppression. It's not surprising that the banking concept of education regards men as adaptable, manageable beings. The more students work at storing the deposits entrusted to them, the less they develop the critical consciousness which would result from their intervention in the world as transformers of that world. In the pedagogy of the oppressed, all education is political. The knowledge of the teacher and the knowledge of the student are equally valuable. The knowledge they construct together has the power to transform the world, and the purpose of education is the transformation of the world through liberation from oppression. The oppressed must see that the limitations of their freedom are not inevitable, but are the result of actions taken to construct and maintain an unjust world. This perception must lead to action, to praxis, the struggle to transform the violent world. There is no such thing as a neutral education process. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of generations into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Who is education for? The oppressed must be understood in the context of their oppression, their relationship with the oppressors, and the mechanisms of oppression. Dialogue must vary in accordance with their stage of liberation, their historical conditions, and the level at which the oppressed perceive reality. The oppressed must liberate themselves, and, in the process, they will liberate their oppressors. So how do we educate? Through problem posing. An alternative to the banking model of education, problem posing recognizes that knowledge is formulated through the dialogue between teacher and student. Key elements of problem posing are praxis, dialogue, and conscientization. Praxis involves engaging in the cycle of theory, application, evaluation, reflection, and then back to theory. Social transformation is the product of praxis at the collective level. Praxis is explored through dialogue, and through dialogue we find meaning and come to deeper understandings. Conscientization is the development of an awareness of what you're doing and changing the nature of your teaching practice as a result. This perception must lead to action, to praxis, the struggle to transform the violent world. And what are the applications of Freire for the 21st century? Goodall uses Freire's concept of the banking model of education in her analysis of the interaction and relationship between school staff and parents. Engaging parents in their children's learning has been said to be one of the most powerful levers available for improving schools. But, for many reasons, parental engagement in children's learning has remained elusive. We often find that parents are expected to be recipients of information, rather than co-constructors of knowledge about their children. Goodall suggests that for parents and school staff to both support children's learning, there must be effective dialogue between them. Dialogue which, when appropriate, also includes the child. She presents a way of applying Freire's pedagogy in order to move toward a more equitable, sustainable, and fruitful partnership between all those involved in schooling and learning. Webb considers how Freire's notion of critical hope is foundation to his pedagogy. Webb argues that for Freire, the very possibility of education is grounded in his understanding of hope, as the constant search born of the human being's consciousness of its own incompleteness. Not only the possibility of education, but also its purpose. For if hope is characterized as a constant search, then the purpose of education is to act as its permanent guide. The discourse of conscientization is the discourse of transformative hope. Indeed, Freire's notion of critical hope is not false hope that has lost its grip on reality, but a hope in spite of reality. Indeed, for Freire, hope must be born out of struggle and must affirm the realities of daily existence. It is a liberating hope through which human beings become agents of their own destiny and willfully strive to create a new and better society. Giroux places his discussion of Freire within a critique of the market-driven logic of neocapitalism. He argues that higher education must reclaim its conceptualization as a public good and as a deeply civic, political, and moral practice. that is pedagogy as a practice for freedom. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to our discussion.